We practice this thing that we call vertical diversity. What we focus on is not just diversity on the page, because what you'll see is 50% of books featuring Black kids aren't actually written by Black creators. I think everybody, every culture, every group is capable of telling their own stories, and they have people within those experiences who are more than happy to tell about their walk of life than speaking from that experience and using that mouthpiece for the sake of checking a diversity box. So we kind of just want to make sure that it's sincere.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Matt Morris, couples counselor and family therapist, joined as always by my co-host, Eric Garcia, certified financial planner, and this is the Building Us podcast. Eric, I got a question for you. I know you have kids, I have kids. That means you've read a lot of children's books. You've probably read them many, many times. But what's one of your memorable children's books from your childhood?
Oh, man. Memorable children's books from my child. I'm going to tell you that's going to be really hard because since I was a child, I've probably read more children's books as an adult to my kids. So I would say probably my most memorable children's book is a book. I think it's called La Cucarachita Martina. So it's a book.
All right.
That's like a story that Cuban parents tell. Like if you go to any Cuban person and ask them about Martina, like that's like a cucarachita is like a little roach. So it's just a story about the little roach Martina. That's probably the most memorable, or I would say one of my favorite books to read to my kids.
You know, I was just like thinking, I was doing something mindless the other day, so my mind drifted to a book from my childhood, and I was remembering Rikki Tikki Tavi, this little mongoose who could kill cobras in Africa, and it was a fascinating story, and I just like, it was such a strong character.
Rikki Tikki who?
Rikki Tikki Tavi.
Rikki Tikki Tavi. That's good.
I think
some good alliteration.
I think it's actually I think it's really part of one of the Jungle Book series. But yeah, it stuck with me as a kid as this really strong character who could take on difficulty, and that was cool to me. Well, Eric, we have a special treat today, a special episode today, in that we have a superstar children's book author.
Superstar.
Mr. Jesse Bird is with us today. Thank you, Jesse, for being here. Take a minute to introduce yourself and tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt and Eric, for having me on. I'm really excited for this chat. As you mentioned, my name is Jesse Bird. I'm a children's book author and publisher, amongst a few other things, and I focus on diverse children's book literature. So the stories that we create for the publishing house that we have called Jesse B Creative focuses on stories that are not only featuring diverse characters, but are created by diverse creators. And so saving more space to make sure there's authentic diversity throughout the pages and throughout the stories is something we really cherish.
That's awesome. And Eric, I know that you've been binge reading, not binge watching, but binge reading some of Jesse's books of late. Really enjoying those with your kids and your family. So I'm curious, what have been some of those experiences, and what have been some of the conversations your family's been having around some of Jesse's work? Yeah,
I absolutely love children's books because I can get through them. I am notoriously...
Yes. We can finish them. Yes.
Yeah. Like I have I don't know how many unread books on my...
They have pictures too.
I like...
really cool pictures.
The artwork, Jesse, the artwork in your books
art.
The artwork is spot on, man. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
It's fantastic. But I do love kids' books. So I read through all 4 of your books, like binge, and like one is we're gonna get to it. It's like 280 pages. It's like a I don't know what you would call it, but it's not a board, but it's not a kids book. It's an intense book. I liked it. But anyway, I was reading through Sunny Days, or all your books, last night again with my daughter, my 7-year-old. And we get through them all, and she's like, does he have more books? She's loving them. And I'm like, no, he doesn't, but he does have a book that he's working on, the storyline that's coming out in December. It's the Mermaid Princesses. And the Mermaid Princesses, the author is an African-American lady, Maya Cameron Gordon, and she has a little video on the Indiegogo page as she's pre-selling her books. And she talks about why she wrote the book. And her daughter loves fantasy, and she wanted her daughter to read books where characters looked like her daughter, or her daughter could identify to the characters. So we watched that little video clip, and then I read her Sunny Day again, and I said, "Hey, I'm talking to Mr. Jesse tomorrow. Is there any comments about your book that you'd like me to share with him? What did you like about Sunny Day?" And this was her comment, 7-year-old. She goes, "I like how he made a lot of people black in Sunny Days because most books don't have black people in them."
No.
So I was like, "Oh, tell me more about that." She goes, "Well, I just realized most of the books that I've read, all the people are white." And I thought about that, and my next comment to her was, "Well, don't you think that?" And I named some of her black friends. I said, "Don't you think your friends like to read books where they can see the characters that look like them?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I thought that was just such a cool just observation that she made, unsolicited.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to notice these things in a vacuum, right? And that's why it's so important to not erase any colors from the rainbow, but to add more colors to the rainbow. Like so we can appreciate all of the Roy G. Biv on the spectrum. We need to be able to make sure that we have those colors because that diversity, because it adds contrast to the material that's out there, just to make sure that, everyone has a place and everyone can see themselves reflected. That's really important.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is the right time to make this point, but I've always thought this idea of color blindness is a real fallacy, and kids notice color all the time. I mean, Eric, in your story, your daughter did not have to be told that people are different shades. She noticed that, and she had an insight about that and a comment about that. Jesse, it seems like it's really important to you to have very diverse characters in your books. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we practice this sort of concept. And when I say we, I mean me, the illustrators that I work with, any editor that's assigned to a specific project, because even though I do editing for other projects, it's really hard to edit your own work. But we practice this thing that we call vertical diversity. And what that means is, as I shared a little bit earlier, for example, Dreamcatcher is set in Thailand. It was inspired by a trip to Thailand. And that's really what inspired sort of the setting for that book. And we were really passionate about getting an illustrator who was Thai. Hey, there it is. Thanks, Eric. An illustrator who was Thai. So our illustrator, Nuttafon Siriaparaku, born and raised in Bangkok. And our characters are Thai. Our illustrator is Thai, just to make sure that we have someone at the table who has that walk of life, who can tell us if we're getting it wrong, if we're messing it up, and someone who's integral to the creative process, not somebody who's sitting off on the sidelines kind of submitting a design note every once in a while, but somebody who's literally handling all of the artwork, all of the depictions of these characters, because I can't draw worth a lick. So so every book that you see, I will be pairing with somebody who has that talent. And so that's what we focus on is not just diversity on the page, because what you'll see is that 50% of books featuring Black kids aren't actually written by Black creators. And that's a major problem in the industry that I'm actually writing an article on now that'll be out in about a week or two, just to show some of the metrics behind own voices. So I think everybody, every culture, every group is capable of telling their own stories. And they have people within those experiences who are more than happy to tell about their walk of life. You don't necessarily need to reach over the aisle and have somebody who has no clue what it's like to be a young Black boy or girl, then speaking from that experience and using that mouthpiece for the sake of checking a diversity box and things like that. And so we kind of just want to make sure that it's sincere, and that the people who are being reflected are actually a part of cooking the meal.
I love that. Got me thinking about all kinds of things, but you did mention that you're writing an article about that. Do you have a title of that you could share now, so that as people listen to this, they could find that? And is it something that we could put in our show notes for listeners later?
Yeah. So right now there are 3 spec titles kind of kicking around. Once the title is finalized, I'll definitely be sharing it with you. But it's all the heartbeat of it is just that theme that we talked about, just trying to stay away from appropriation in children's books, and what the numbers look like and what some of the images look like in terms of what's on the market right now. It's actually quite disturbing when you peek behind the curtain and see just how many stories from minorities aren't written by people within that experience, and then therefore the sales money goes to people outside of the experience of the cultures being reflected on the page. And so there's just a lot of opportunity there for us to just get better, as a publishing community.
And I definitely want to come back to that particular topic. It does have me thinking about, I grew up in New Mexico and would read Native American children's books or have them read to me. And, it's now got me wondering, like, how many of those were written by Native peoples or were appropriations of those experiences. I have no idea as a kid, but I can remember the stories about Kokopelli and other Indian figures and gods being important to me as a kid. And, the Zia sun god and the Zia symbol of New Mexico and all of those little, those imageries that are really important being part of my childhood experience, but having no sense of the business side of that. Eric mentioned earlier a book that you authored. I think it's called the Penguin King.
King Penguin.
King Penguin, yes.
King Penguin.
King
And he
Penguin.
mentioned that it was longer and kind of alluded to or intimated that it deals with some heavier stuff. So I wanted to ask you, are there children's books or are there adult books or are there just books that present themselves as adult or children? Is it a real distinction?
So the line's definitely becoming more fluid, and today's market is the most experiential publishing market that you'll see in terms of, or should I say, people taking risk, and people are trying to get these really macro concepts being taught and find vehicles to feed them to kids earlier. And so you'll see books about, like the books about racism now, kids books, picture books, board books, that stuff largely didn't exist just a few years ago. That wasn't a market space that people were comfortable having those conversations for that age level. And so on a wide scale, I mean, you may find some books here and there, but it wasn't going to be as celebrated as it is now or as widespread. And so the lines are definitely getting more fluid. Publishers are taking more chances. And also, you have to realize Amazon is responsible for 50% of book sales nationwide. And there are a million self-published books that come out every single year. So people are saying, look, I have a story to tell, and I want to tell it without somebody telling me how I should tell it. Like I
want to tell it my way.
I want to tell it direct, unfiltered, 100 proof, straight to the people. And so there are a lot of books that enter the market that that don't go through sort of the process of approval, should I say, from traditional publishing.
Can we talk
Eric,
about?
You have that book, right? You've read King Penguin.
Oh my gosh, yeah. But hold on one second. I just want to make a quick point. You're talking about books being appropriated and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking up La Cucarachita Martina, and the more recent version, Martina the Beautiful Cockroach, which was written in English, was indeed retold by a Cuban woman. So I just wanted to make sure that was
excellent.
I was just checking. So yeah. So Matt, you asked about like children's books, and Jesse, I picked up King Penguin. I think I picked up a copy for me like on Saturday maybe. And I opened it up, and if you don't mind, you probably cringe when people read your parts of your book to you. But like, can I read like the opening paragraph and a half really quick? Because it just struck me. Like I'm like, this is a kid's book. It's great. It says, this is the prologue. We're not even in chapter 1. This is the prologue. Where there is division, there will be strife. Splitting one group for another assures danger will follow. It begins as appreciation, sure, admiring each other's differences. But once a disagreement pushes and patience sheds its fears, those same differences become very dangerous. They become lines in the sand. Pierre's father swept his focus across their small cave. And then a couple more sentences. Pierre harbored curiosity about the war for as long as he could remember its origins, its persistence, its survival. Still, he remained too timid to ask the pointed questions. This time, though, since his father brought it up, he guessed now was a good time as any. What started our war? I mean, how did we get here? And then it goes on to say, his father says, I was dropped into it. And I'm reading this, I'm like, oh man, like this is a social commentary to some degree. This is like, it's prophetic, man. This is a kid's book.
Yeah, I definitely think you get more, you can expound on more territory for books that are for 9+, 12+. So that's a middle grade chapter book, which obviously gives us a different bit of real estate than a children's picture book. But, these issues are real issues that not only are affecting the world, but kids are actually growing up in. I mean, we choose to tell this story through the vehicle of penguins, which is my personal favorite animal. But the issues that they're facing are very real. They're very human. And so for us, sometimes we think it's too early to present certain realities to young readers, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. But sometimes those readers are already living in that reality. They're already living near war or in an active war area. They're already living in poverty. They already know what hunger feels like. And so sort of pretending that experience isn't a part of the human experience isn't doing them a service. But you're not protecting them from it. It's their reality. It's their life. And you're just not speaking to it. You're not highlighting it. You're not giving it any acknowledgement. And so I think it actually does a disservice when we don't find a way to talk about some of the real things that are happening and some of the real things that children, unfortunately younger than we hope that they would, are enduring and are having to face. And so for me, I don't like to try to shy away from reality or sincerity. I want to try to find a way that's, grade level appropriate, of course, to open a dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're dealing with what we would consider adult themes: war, loss, destruction, pain and suffering. But in any active war that I was aware of that I can think of, I have to acknowledge there's kids around that. There's kids around that. I have a friend who's a counselor in New Orleans, and he works with a lot of school-age children. And he was talking to this kindergarten kid one day in New Orleans and asked him to draw a picture of his bedroom. And the child drew a picture of a bedroom that had things in it like you might expect a bed, but it had this stick leaning near the door. And my friend, the counselor, asked the kid what that was, and he goes, "Oh, that's a gun." That the kid was fully aware of the violence in his neighborhood, the violence in his home, the violence around him. Those aren't adult themes or kid themes. Those are just human themes. Those are just the things that are around us. And so I'm curious about how do you, as an author, how do you handle these harder aspects of life in humane ways that still remain developmentally appropriate for the reader, if that's a thing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to context. A lot of it comes down to world building and the vehicles that you use to communicate the stories, right? Mm-hmm. So, the text on the page, the artwork, these are all they're just vehicles that we're using to communicate some sort of core purpose, some notion, whether that's everybody deserves to be treated equally, or something along those themes. Everything else that's built around it is just a delivery system to hopefully help you understand and absorb or ask questions or connect. And so for us, what's really important is showing spectrum. So not everybody in a book is going to be one way. And that's one way of not pigeonholing a community or a group of people or an experience as, these people are like that. It's important to show, like in Sunny Days, we walk you through the neighborhood and you see different Black entrepreneurs running different types of businesses. Mm-hmm. They're not all going to be athletes. They're not all going to be, actresses and musicians. Mm-hmm. There are people who have a vast variety of interests. And I think that's one of the most important ways of showing that people can be anything and can do anything, is to show the diversity of people doing and being anything mm-hmm. on the page. And so that's one of the ways that we make sure that people don't get pigeonholed in terms of taking complex issues. For us, it's like fractions, right? You're trying to boil it down to like the simplest denominator. So you're trying to get away from all the jargon, all the politics. What's the human core issue that we're dealing with? Mm-hmm. It can often be summed up in a word or two. We're often dealing with fear, or we're dealing with jealousy, or something along these lines. And that's our antagonist. That's the force that's pushing back. Now, what's our positive charge? What's our plus charge? It's going to be love. It's going to be compassion. It's going to be awareness. But it's really hard to have compassion without first having awareness. So that's why it's important to talk about these things. Cause
that's all King Penguin right there, man. Betrayal and love and friendship, community, and loyalty.
Yeah.
I'm about to make a bold statement. Okay.
All right.
And I believe this wholeheartedly. And you and I have been kind of having we've been messaging each other back and forth. So you kind of know some of my feelings and kind of how much I like King Penguin. But we'll look at some other kind of in the same genre of children's books. And this is the bold statement. You look at Lord of the Rings, children's books. When Lord of the Rings was written, it was written for 9 and 10-year-olds. If you read the history of it, it was written as one volume. And J.R. Tolkien's, I think, like 10-year-old nephew wrote a commentary on it that, it's appropriate for 10-year-olds, right? Harry Potter, right? A little bit different of a genre, but we're dealing with similar themes: war, destruction, death, love, loyalty. What Chronicles of Narnia, right? War, death, destruction, fear, and then your book, that's same thing. Through the eyes and through penguins, and as I'm reading it, like I have picture, like I can see these penguins as people. It's fascinating. So that's my bold statement. I'm putting this book in the same that
It's a classic.
This book 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, hopefully there's some hopefully this is number one of multiple in this series, because you left it open, man. You left me wanting more.
Well, that's a good point to leave people at, and there's definitely more books in that series.
Awesome.
Speaking of that, leaving people wanting more, my wife and I are different about this. I like a movie that ends a little bit unfinished, a little bit frayed at the edges, where I get to kind of wonder what happened, and in that way, the story follows me home, follows me into my day, and I continue to think about the characters. Other people really like a tidy ending. As an author, as a children's book author in particular, how do you balance those different forces?
Well, I'll give you guys a little bit to that. Every single book that I've put out so far is a series. So they're all book one in their own pipeline of stories to come. And for me, what I admire in series, and what I've always admired in series, and what we strive for in the work that we produce, is that every single book needs to be complete unto itself. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like Russian dolls. You're going to stack them, but each one needs to be a complete doll. So people have to have a satisfying sunrise, high noon, and sunset within the narrative. And then you can tease and trail and lead and imply that there's more. But I think the goal with every single book in a series is that it's satisfying in and of itself, that you feel like everything that we set you up for the main a story arc, we answered those questions. We satisfied that curiosity. We completed the circle. And so I think that's sort of the trick. I think it's less about where you leave people and how you leave people. It's more about, did they feel like they had a full meal, or did they feel like they showed up for a full meal and they got like 75% of the meal? Did you make good on the promises that you made in the first act, in your second and third act, and things like that.
I'm a little different than you, Matt. Like because it's not my story. I didn't write the story. I don't want to have to imagine how it ends, but I don't want stories to end. I want them to keep going, but I want to know that the author has an end in mind that he's working towards.
Yes.
So it's kind of like Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings. Have you seen the movie? Have y'all seen the movie? So
absolutely.
Yep.
We went and saw it. Me and my wife went and saw it in the movie theater when it came out, and she had no idea that it was a trilogy. So the movie ends with Sam and Frodo walking through the mountains, and there's danger lurking, chasing them, right? And she's like, "That was the stupidest movie." I'm like, I look at him like, "Are you crazy?" And then I told her it was a trilogy, and I don't think she's ever watched the final two because she was so mad because she just wasn't expecting it. So I knew that there was an end. I knew that the author was going somewhere. So that's kind of how I am. I like to know that there's an end. And as I read King Penguin, that's what I texted you. I'm like, dude, tell me this is a series, or do I have to choose my own adventure? Like, I need to know, are you taking me somewhere? Can I expect something? So even though it's not resolved, it is resolved, but it's not resolved. I know that you're going somewhere, and I'm okay with that.
Exactly. Solve one conflict, and now we're jumping into another larger and different conflict.
Oh, I'm excited.
So speaking of your work and your books, I think this would be a great time, if you're willing, to read us a little something from your work?
Yeah, sure. The passage that comes to mind, just to do a little table setting. So this is from a book called Real Jungle Tales. It was illustrated by an artist in Brazil. Her name is Andressa Meisner. We're actually working on a few more projects together now. It was a really fun book to do. It took about 1.5 years end to end, which is 3 times as long as Sunny Days, even though it's a third of the length.
Oh, wow.
Largely, and that's because of the rhyming structure. So when you're doing rhyming structure in picture books, it's almost like making a musical, I would imagine, where the words not only have to rhyme, but they have to advance the narrative or the plot or expand on character development. So they have to serve at least 2 purposes at once. They need to rhyme. They need to be genre appropriate, of course. They also need to push the story forward. You know, you can't just be rhyming without any progression of the plot. And so, you know, this character, our main character Z, and I can tell you this much about the story without ruining it for you. She gets punished on Halloween. She doesn't get to go trick or treating, and they have this tradition at her school where kids basically bring in all of their candy the next day to school, and they get to like swap stuff. So kids are swapping chocolates, and kids are swapping, you know, sours for sweets and taffy for hard candy. And she's watching everybody enjoying their Halloween candy, having a blast. And she obviously has none. She doesn't have any loot. She didn't get to go trick or treating. And so because of that, she comes up with a plan. Her and her trouble buddy, her sidekick, they come up with a plan to try to trick the other classmates out of their candy, to try to trick them into giving some candy to them. And so this is what I'm about to read or recite, is the very beginning of her beginning to trick her classmates. So let me see if I can get this right off the top of my head. And if not, I have the file on my computer and I'll pull it up just in case I get murky. Okay, so this is Z speaking to her classmates. Listen up closely and give me your ear. I have a secret that you need to hear. On Halloween night, by the skin of my teeth, I escaped from a jungle of monsters and beasts and creatures that creep when you lie down to sleep. They're headed this way, so we don't have much time, but this secret I tell you could help you survive. Because you see, zebras in jungles are tall as a roof, bigger and meaner than ones at the zoo, skin like a barcode covered in flies, one ear facing forward, one facing behind. They jump and they kick and blow smoke from their noses and gobble up kids from their heads to their toeses. So that's a little bit of the transition.
I love it. Now let me just add this for context. So you do readings. You go around and you read to groups of kids. Mm-hmm. Now Jesse is 6'8". He's one of the few people that I look up to. Literally, I look up to Jesse. Now, you don't just read these books as Jesse, right? Tell us a little bit about kind of the whole context of you reading these books to kids. This is fun.
Yeah, so pre-COVID, I would show up to a school or a library and we would have a scheduled reading. And I would say every blue moon, they never knew when it was going to happen, but every blue moon I would show up in a ridiculous costume. So I have a zebra costume. Mind you, I'm 6'8". I have a zebra costume with a head. I have a penguin costume that I'm absolutely crazy about. And I have some more costumes that I'm ordering now. I have a big bird costume, which is really fun as well. Also because my last name is Bird. So I think that's it's pretty punny. And so, so every once in a while, I may just do a costume themed reading and show up to an elementary school to read to some first and second and third graders. Totally decked out, because why not? It could be, February.
So do you drive to the school dressed up, or do you change when you get there? Like, what's kind of...
Is it in the trunk?
Oh, no, I keep the costume in my backpack. I don't want to, alarm people in the neighborhood that, that my mind is functioning differently if I show up in March walking around 6'8" in a penguin costume outside.
Yeah, we're gonna put a link to your website. There's pictures of it in there, man. I love it.
You also have a great YouTube channel that I've been enjoying working my way through, and we'll put a link to that as well. Transitioning a little bit to just writing, and your own writing process, and then a little bit, I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier, which is the publishing industry, but a little bit about your own writing process. When did this start for you? What's this journey been like for you?
Yeah, so that's such a great question. I didn't know that I wanted to write as a career, that it was my passion, until I was 22 years old. The very first thing I remember wanting to be in life is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. The second,
Which one?
Donatello, absolutely,
Of course.
purple all day. After that, it was I wanted to be a psychologist, and then from there was like this weird dead space where I just didn't really feel pulled to anything. I mean, I was playing sports. I've been playing basketball my whole life, and I just kind of felt like that was the railroad track I was on, but I wasn't really giving much active thought to, is this what I even like doing? Is it what I would want to do as a career? And things like that. And so once I got injured at 22, we're actually playing against Kawhi Leonard's team at the time in college. I jump up for a rebound, I come down and I feel my knee shift. And I was like, oh, what was that? And I come to find out that it was a lateral meniscus tear. Now, what's great about this, I did have to have surgery, but what's great about it is just a 6 to 8 week recovery period. This isn't a career-ending injury. It happens to plenty of athletes in plenty of different sports. But what it gave me was 6 to 8 weeks to get off of the hamster wheel because sports was paying for school. So sports was very much my job. It was paying for my tuition. It was paying for my housing. So, it was how we keep the lights on. And me get through my education. And so when I had that chance to actually sit still, pause, have this internal walkabout and think about what lit me up, what really excites me, I realized that I've always been passionate about storytelling. It's always been my greatest passion, and storytelling for young audiences, because those are the stories that lit me up. One of my favorite childhood books is The Phantom Tollbooth, and that's because it showed me that you can be silly and fun and funny while also communicating value and sharing something of meaning with young readers. But it doesn't have to be so stiff and stuffy and preachy. You can be ridiculous and still communicate something of importance to young audiences, which I think is just so fun. And so that was when I discovered I wanted to start writing at 22 years old.
One of the first things that drew me to you, Jesse, was I met your dad years ago at a Saturday morning men's breakfast. And I don't know how you came up, but I guess like any proud dad, right? What do? You talk about your kids. And he mentioned that you were a writer, I think he said a business writer. So that's interesting. So I looked you up and I found you giving a presentation on business writing. And right around that time, I was really wanted to dive in. I wanted to get better as a writer, to be able to communicate ideas. And I listened to that presentation. It wasn't that long, but it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type of presentation. Do this, do this, do this. You got to do this. And I thought oh man, I gotta follow this guy. And at that point, I didn't realize you were a children's book writer. And then eventually we connected and we ended up having coffee last year and got to know each other a little bit better. But that's what drew me to you was that idea of business writing and how to communicate ideas to people clearly and to almost sell them on your ideas, to sell them on. And that's how you presented it, is you have to you wrote this book, but now you have to convince people to read this book.
Exactly. I think business writing for creative writers and people who have an affinity for creative writing, I think business writing can be sort of scary or daunting or boring or just seem totally uninterested. But for me, I spent a little bit of time in my professional career. I spent some time as editor-in-chief of Ernst & Young and some other things. And I absolutely adore business writing because it teaches you how to be efficient. It teaches you how to be on voice and on brand. And as we always talk about, there's two sides to the art of publishing. There's storytelling and there's story selling. And each enables the other. The more you sell, the more opportunities you probably have to tell more stories. And so you really do, it's like a left hand, right hand situation where even though you have a dominant hand, I encourage every single creative writer to at least take some sort of copywriting course, pick up a book, listen to a podcast, because once you're done with the creative aspect of telling this narrative, you're going to have to write back of the book copy. You're going to have to write blurbs. You're going to have to communicate to somebody who's never read your work and maybe doesn't even know you why they should give your work a chance. And that, when it comes to doing it in writing, that's sales copy. I don't care how you want to button it up. That's sales copy. And so the more comfortable you get selling your story with your words, I think the more equipped you are to serve your story and get it out there better. And so yeah, when I was giving that talk at Book Expo of America in New York, I think that was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the 4 points that I wanted to hit was called the VICE strategy. And just really simple acronym: voice, impact, clarity, and efficiency. And that's what you're looking for in any business writing. Are you on voice? Are you grabbing them? Does your writing have impact? You don't want to be boring. That's probably the number one rule in any type of writing. So does it have impact? Clarity. Is it really clear for them to understand what you're asking, what you're saying, and what they should do next? What's the call to action? And then efficiency. Don't take 10 words to say something you can say in 2. Get to it, get through it. And so those are sort of my 4 principles of business writing. And actually they apply largely to creative writing as well. But I have mad love for business writing. And I didn't think I would. When I first started, I was just like everybody else, like, oh, no, not this. I just kind of did it because I needed some work at the time. And then from there, I was like, oh, this is just storytelling of a different kind. This is, just by a different flavor. But yeah.
Jesse, you started to talk a little bit earlier about the publishing industry and some inequities in the publishing industry. And I don't know a ton about that industry nor those inequities, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. But I'm very interested in supporting Black-owned businesses and learning more about economic forces that affect Black-owned businesses. And how does that show up in the publishing industry?
Yeah, Matt, that's such a great question. And to answer that, I definitely want to go back to sort of the beginning of my family's journey in publishing. So combined, my mother and I, we have about 31 years in the publishing industry. She started writing when I was 11, but she started writing for adults. So she has about 27 published novels that are adult fiction, very much adult fiction. And a couple of those are New York Times bestsellers. Part of the reason why I didn't know I wanted to go into writing, because I always felt like that was mom's thing. And I kind of want to find my thing. And then I found out that, of course, storytelling is this vast pool, big house with many, many rooms. And so, you don't have to do the same thing just because you're both storytellers. And so when I sort of found my passion within it as well, those were the conversations we had around the dinner table. It wasn't just about the art of storytelling, my mom and I. It was about the business of storytelling, agent percentages, royalty contracts. What does it mean to earn out? Will you get paid quarterly or twice a year? Who owns your domestic and foreign rights? Do they get audiobooks? Is your copyright registered to you, or is the publishing house trying to take your copyright for them, which they should never do, by the way. Any authors listening, your copyright for the words should always be yours. And so I knew when I discovered that writing for kids and telling stories for kids was my passion, I knew that there were all of these things in business that just could be so much better. There were only so many seats at the table for creatives of color. In fact, my mom had to self-publish her first novel, and it was only when she sold 10,000 copies of the book and it was well on its way to being a bestseller independently, a New York Times bestseller independently, did she then get a 3-book deal from a traditional publisher. Nobody wanted to pick up her work until she proved that as a Black woman, she can write a book that sells and that people like and that they gravitate towards. And so those opportunities, the burden of proof, the amount of work you have to do just to climb your way in to an opportunity and how many seats there are at the table for creators of color, obviously is a huge issue, and there's a huge disparity there. So that's why I knew when I got into the business, yes, I will do projects for traditional publishing houses, talking to Scholastic and some other places right now about different projects, but I will always want to have a domain where I can, not only that we can make space for creators of color, but we can make sure that they're getting proper equity and royalties, and things like that, because that's important for the longevity of authors, especially authors of color, is that they have the right deal structure. They're getting the right payout on the front and the back and the advance and the royalties to make a living out of this. These people have kids in college. They have kids who need dental work. They have, mortgages. And so if you want them to continue creating in the space, which most authors and illustrators, if they keep going and they keep learning, they're only going to get better. So their best book isn't likely going to be the first, second, or third book. It may be their 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th book, after they've learned more about their craft and learned more about the business of how to sell and built a database and they have name recognition. And so what we're trying to do to help be a part of the solution at Jesse B. Creative, the publishing house, is we want to become the Motown of children's book publishing. We want to become a place where we not only attract diverse talent, but we develop you creatively and professionally. We want you to know more about the business. We want you to know more about how to sell, but we also want you to know more about the craft, because you do have to get in the gym and you do have to get your shots up. If you expect to get better at this, it's just like anything else. You have to spend time on task. And, as mentioned, as we talked about a little bit offline, 50% of the books that are featuring kids of color, picture books, children's picture books, aren't written or illustrated by people of color, which obviously gets dangerously close to appropriation. We have histories of blackface in this country, Aunt Jemima, Ben, minstrelsy. And so it's dangerous when you have other cultures trying to speak to and through and about your story. And it's also unnecessary. I've met a ton of phenomenal authors and illustrators and storytellers from every single community. They're more than capable of telling their stories, given the right opportunities and the right support.
It's interesting. You said a couple of things in there that Matt and I talk often about is we talk about a lot of business owners are good at their craft. So a lot of creative writers are good creative writers. But a lot of business owners are not necessarily good at owning and running a business. And it seems that that's a part of the industry that you've excelled in, not just the craft of writing, but the craft of operating that business.
Yeah, that was something I feel so fortunate to have had a foundation in, and at least a baseline understanding from having a parent in the industry. And then from there, since a lot of things have evolved and a lot of opportunities have grown, even from there, it's been a learning curve. But if you're an author, if you're an illustrator, you are a business. In today's publishing literary market, that's how you have to see yourself. Even if you have a deal with one of the major houses, Houghton Mifflin, Penguin, Scholastic, or you're going independent direct to market, no matter what you have going on, you need to always be about the business of trying to sell your stories and share your stories and build your brand and build your base on your own land. Because there may come a day where, say, you do your first 2 books at Houghton Mifflin, but the 3rd book that you pitch them, they're not interested in that book. And so you walk it down the aisle to Scholastic, and Scholastic is. Now, if all of the equity and all of your bases is stuck inside of Houghton Mifflin's publishing company, then you're not the one who has the value. You haven't been building your social. You haven't been building your newsletter list. You haven't been building your website traction and unique monthly impressions. And so you basically have all the equity tied into the house, and you don't want to do that. You are a brand. You want to make sure that you are building your own stats, your own traction, your own following, so that no matter where you go, you're an asset. Because today's age, publishers are asking, what's your following? They will ask you, what's your marketing plan? And they would expect you to have an idea of, all right, if we print this book with you, what are you going to do to sell it?
That's good. That's good. The Motown of children's book publishing.
Yeah.
I like that. Can we, Matt, do you have a follow-up to that? Because I want to get to like a quick, I've got like a list of questions that I have to ask you. I have to get through them, and I'll tell you why in a second. But Matt, I'll let you comment on that real quick.
I do have a related question, which I saw on your website that you have some investment opportunities for people who may be interested. Now, I really was interested in that, just in the sense that this podcast is about relationships, but it's also about finance. It's also about entrepreneurialism. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit about, I'm not saying pitch us, I'm just, what's the opportunity there with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are about to enter our fundraising round for our seed for the diverse publishing company. And what we're seeking overall is $2.5 million for an 18-month runway. And that will allow us to produce anywhere from 16 to 20 children's books and really get them the marketing and the equity and the support that they need to actually have a viable splash within the market. And so we're handling all of our sort of investment side and the platform through Carta. And we will be letting investors know, which is why there you can sort of sign up to be alerted on the website of when everything is ready for you all to start making investments. But, we want people to have access to opportunity for equity. We want people to feel like this is a company and a publishing house that is about the work of the people, of equality, of equity, of speaking to things that maybe some of the bigger houses don't necessarily want to touch because they feel like it may be dangerous, detrimental to their brand if it doesn't go well. We want to be able to take a little bit more calculated, educated explorations in speaking with kids about certain topics and having a lot of fun doing it. Like nothing we do ever wants to be preachy. I mean, Matt's sort of read our books. We like to have a lot of fun. And because we think that if you bore kids, you'll never get to teach kids. So no matter how important your message is, if they're bored, that's it. And so if you don't engage them meaningfully, then, and so we're really important. We're really, big on that sort of thing. And that was what the investment piece is that we are going to start fundraising. We are going to start bringing in equity partners. And we would love for anybody who feels like the mission of diversity in publishing and children's books is important to them to really consider going on the website and signing up to be on our newsletter.
That's cool. And along those same lines, you don't just write, but you also consult people who are writing, right? You work with artists who have ideas, and you help edit it. You help storytell. You help with the consulting on the publishing end, right? And those types of things, correct?
Correct. Yes. So as a publishing house, we've been internally funded, totally bootstrapped up until this point. So there's only so many stories that we can, from a capital standpoint, afford to back. But there are so many more great creators with so many awesome stories that we still want to be a part of helping you professionally get your work out there. Because here's sort of a fun stat: less than 5% of books manuscripts submitted to traditional publishers make it past the first round of review. Most of them get rejected for really fixable things like how you submitted your work. Did you follow the guidelines? Are there plot holes, character development issues? Something that an experienced professional editor could have helped you catch before you took your step, before you went into that sort of job interview, so to speak, before you submitted your work. And so it's important for me and for us to provide those services to where even if our table is full, we still want to help you get your voice out there in the most meaningful way to you. And so we have publishing consultations to help you figure out, what path is best for you and give a simple, plain English overview of publishing and how everything works. And we have editing packages so that you can make sure that, your first step is your best step if you're submitting to a publisher, because that's going to be the hardest thing to get past is the first round. After you get past the first round, you actually have a 67% chance of getting a book deal, according to Publishers Weekly. So you got a good chance if you can just get past the initial wave of review. And a lot of that is making sure that you don't have story errors and submission errors that were largely fixable if you had employed the help of somebody who sort of knows where to place the energy.
Awesome. So we're gonna change gears here real quick. This is the speed round. Okay. These are questions that I have to ask. I told my daughter I was talking to you, and I said, "Do you have any questions for Jesse?" So I have 5 or 6 questions. We don't have time to get too deep, man. All right, but they're important. All right. So number 1, and people listening, this you might not necessarily understand the context of these questions, but all the better reason to go buy Jesse's books. All right. So number 1, why is the rabbit the queen of nightmares?
Why is the rabbit the queen of nightmares? Yes, she's the queen of nightmares and Dreamcatcher for Remy, who is the dreamer. And Remy had a traumatic experience when she was even younger than she is now, where she was at an animal farm and she sort of fell and rabbits were coming in for feeding time, and they sort of like had this stampede of rabbits who just kind of hopped over. And of course they didn't hurt her.
This is the story behind the story, man. This is fantastic.
This is character development. And so for her, it was rather traumatizing to just have like a herd of stampeding, hopping rabbits, all over you. And that was sort of where her fear developed of rabbits.
I sense a prequel. Where did you get the idea of giant animals?
Where did I get the idea of giant animals? So scale is always something to me that's amusing. You're making something that's big, small, or making something small, big. I sort of like that juxtaposition. And so when it came to Real Jungle Tales especially, I think we really wanted to play with size because she was trying to tell a scary story, right? And so often it's size and scale for kids that's really, really scary.
Okay. All right. This is a good one. If dream catchers were a real thing, not saying that they're not, this is a 7-year-old asking, if they were a real thing, would you want yours to be strong, brave, or a leader?
Ooh, strong, brave, or a leader? That's a great question. And I hate to go off road, but I think intelligent would be the one that I would want to go with. I would want them to be thoughtful because as you'll see in the other books in the Dreamcatcher series, some of these problems are not coming right at you. This isn't an all-out melee. You really are going to have to think about how to solve the problems of how to stop these bad dreams from.
All right, we're going to go with leader, because good leaders are thoughtful. Right?
Leader's the closest one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
For sure.
All right. Does Sunny Days take place in New Orleans? And if not, how did you get the idea? Because dancing in the streets to music, carrying umbrellas sounds a lot like New Orleans.
Yes, great question. Sunny Days is loosely based in New Orleans. We didn't name New Orleans specifically because we know natural disasters happen everywhere on the planet, and so we didn't want to put the name in. But absolutely, it's based in New Orleans, and obviously is inspired by the city recovering. A lot of the city recovering after Hurricane Katrina.
Awesome. Two more. We're almost done. This one's easy.
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you like peaches?
Oh, I love peaches. I think kiwi is probably one of my favorite fruit, though.
Both are fuzzy. Both are fuzzy.
Yeah,
because big
You
juicy
like fuzzy
peaches.
fruits.
That's Sunny Days.
Yeah,
Do you eat a kiwi skin on or skin off?
Skin off. It makes a mess, but I do eat it skin off.
Yeah,
All
there's
right.
a kid in my neighborhood that used to eat it skin on, and I had never seen that before. That was wild, but it works.
Man.
It works.
Whatever. Do you, Matt? Do you, buddy? All right, last one. How do you come up with the names for the people in your books?
So some are inspired by real people that I know. So in Sunny Days, Miss Shirley. Shirley is my grandmother's name. It's also my godmother's name. Mr. Pip, that's an uncle of mine. Pip is an uncle of mine, and Mr. Johnny is also another uncle of mine. But Martine was a name that was totally, designed for this particular narrative. We wanted it to sound Afro-French, as New Orleans culture is largely inspired by. And so that was what was important to us. So sometimes it's the setting and the location. Sometimes it's the personal connection. Sometimes it's the world that they inhabit that, gives their name.
Now, this is my question, because you said something that made me think of it. Sherry in King Penguin. Who was she? Was she inspired? Like, I'm reading that, and I feel like the character is a quintessential New Orleans woman. Is like, am I just her speech, her vernacular, just kind of the attitude, the way she says things? Is that?
Yeah, Sherry's definitely inspired by a real life human interaction and a relationship that I know. I think her family's from New Orleans, but she's from Oakland, and she's a dear relationship of ours, and she's just fantastic. And I just wanted to sort of put her in the narrative too.
Okay,
Give her
awesome,
some
man.
space.
Jesse, this has been a lot of fun. I want to give you an opportunity just to, are there any closing thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, just that in a capitalistic, economy, you largely vote with your dollars. And to put it that plainly is that if you want to see more diversity, you want to see more diversity by diverse people, the easiest way to do that is to financially support the work of and the businesses of diverse people. Posts and petitions are fantastic, but what I'm seeing here recently with all of the people really making the economic effort to say, like, no, this is how I show I want to see more of this, is that I'm going to add fuel into this tank, and I'm going to make sure that this business has some gas in the tank to do some of the things that they want to do. And so if that's a mission that's important to you, diversity in children's book literature, I happen to think it's one of the first ways kids are introduced to the world. It's through the books and the cartoons that they read. And so we want to make sure that the world is reflective of the diversity that they're going to live within and amongst in a global society, in a global economy. And so for us, it's really important to introduce that early in a way that's fun, that they allow to have a good time, and that they can connect with these characters. So if that's important to you, you can find my work and our work at jessebcreative.com. That's JESSEB as in boy, creative.com. And I'm happy to personally sign out any copies, autograph and personalize any copies that you purchase via the website. It's also available on Amazon as well. All the books are available there except for Dreamcatcher. It will be available there next week. But yeah, we would just love to build that relationship with you, your family, your communities, and because we have 17 stories in the queue. We have 5 right now being developed, and 3 that'll be out before the end of this year. So we got a lot. We have a lot of fun we want to have with you guys, and so we hope we get that opportunity. So please check us out. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at the same thing, at Jesse B Creative. And
also, I'm going to put a plug in here. You can also go to his website and gift books to kids. And I think that's really cool that you have that I know like around Christmas time, you'll put out messages asking people if they want to gift books to kids, but that's a really good way to get books into the hands of kids. Matt, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, just on that topic, I mean, I imagine you can gift books to your kid's school, to your kid's teacher. You regularly want to give your kid's teacher a gift. Instead of another Starbucks card, think about it, gifting a great book from Jesse Be Creative. Jesse, thank you for your work. You have found a way somehow to be both a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle and a psychologist all in one by being a children's book author. Thank you for inspiring kids around the world, my kids, Eric's kids, and in doing so, building us, building our families.
Dude, you're inspiring adults as well.
So thank you for being a part of building us. As we always say, invest in your relationships. Jesse, thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt and Eric. This has been a fantastic chat, and I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Dr. Matt Morris maintains an active private practice for couples and families in the greater New Orleans area. To learn more about his work, visit drmattmorris.com. Eric Garcia can be found online at plan-wisely.com. His branch office is located in New Orleans, Louisiana. The branch phone number is 504-218-5479. Securities offered through Royal Alliance Associates Incorporated, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through New Century Financial Group, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Insurance services offered through Garcia Financial Group, LLC. Entities listed are not affiliated.